Anybody who knows the story of Edsel knows they never made trucks, and if that's the case, what the heck is this? Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution here once again at the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix. You know, this is a great collection with more than 170 cars and trucks, some of which, well, they play a very significant role in automotive history. Others, however, are just footnotes, and this Edsel truck, we're going to call it a footnote to a footnote. But before I explain how this truck came to be, I want you to take a moment to like and subscribe. And in the comments down below, let me know what I got right, and of course, what I got wrong. There's always something I got wrong. And tell me your Edsel stories. Did your family have one of these? Somebody down the block, maybe. Are you an Edsel fan? All right, before we tell the interesting story of how this Edsel truck came to be, we have to take a step back and tell the story of Edsel.
And now for the moment I'm sure you've all been looking forward to. A look at the newest member of the Ford family of fine cars, the Edsel.
You see, the Edsel was born out of optimism. In the early 1950s, the American auto industry was booming. Americans were buying cars in record numbers. Ford Motor Company, led at that point by Henry Ford II, was riding that wave of success. And they wanted more, a bigger piece of the pie. You see, while GM had Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac, Ford had, well, they just had Fords, Mercurys, and Lincolns. The execs at Ford wanted to create another mid-market brand. But they wanted to do it with something that had a little bit more style and automotive innovation, a little more upscale. And it would be called Edsel because it was named after Henry Ford's son, Edsel Ford. He'd actually been known for having a pretty refined taste and a good design sense before his untimely death in 1943. Ford invested millions in market research, design, and advertising. The marketing campaign was massive. Ford promised that Edsel would be unlike anything ever seen before, a car that would set a new standard for style and performance. Finally, on September 4th, 1957, and they call it E-Day, the Edsel was unveiled to the public. The timing, however, really could not have been worse. By 1957, the American economy had started to cool off. It was actually entering a mild recession. Consumers were also getting a little more cautious with their spending. And then there was the styling. The Edsel's designers wanted something very distinctive. And they certainly achieved that. The most talked about feature, of course, was the vertical horse collar grille, as we call it today, which was intended to evoke the classic elegance and help the car stand out on the road. And it definitely did that. Unfortunately, the public didn't like the way it stood out. Many people thought it looked awkward, even comical. Now, to be honest, underneath, behind the looks, the Edsel really wasn't that bad of a car. First off, it shared a lot of pieces with existing Ford and Mercury models. It offered a variety of V8 engines, and it introduced some interesting innovations like the Teletouch push-button transmission in the steering wheel, which, of course, unfortunately, didn't always work well, which once again did not help the Edsel brand. But while the car-buying public may have been a bit overwhelmed by all the hype, they were absolutely underwhelmed by the reality. The Edsel's price was higher than everybody expected it to be, its styling was awkward, and its reliability, remember I mentioned that Teletouch? It was inconsistent. Ford had hoped to sell more than 200,000 Edsels in the first year. Instead, they sold about 63,000. In '59, sales dropped even further, and by 1960, Ford pulled the plug completely. In just 3 short years, one of the most ambitious projects in automotive history was over. Ford lost an estimated $250 million on the Edsel. That's a staggering figure for the time. And you know, the name Edsel became synonymous with failure, a business school case study in how not to launch a product. Ford had overestimated the demand for a new brand, and it had misunderstood the shifting economy. And it also relied too heavily on marketing hype. Which brings us to this truck. You see, one of the mistakes that Ford made was really having Edsel try to do too much for too many people. They had 4 different Edsel model lines that first year. There was the Ranger, the Pacer, the Corsair, and the Citation. That meant a total of 18 different body styles, from sedans to hardtops to convertibles and station wagons. But did Edsel ever build a truck? Now, the answer is absolutely not. You know that. But there is an asterisk. You see, Edsel dealers were encouraged to take Ford F-Series pickups and convert them into Edsel trucks. Ford even created a blueprint for just how to make that happen, complete with which paint codes dealers were supposed to use. Ford dealers were requested to give their full cooperation to the Edsel dealers who were making the swap. They even had options for other trucks, like panel delivery and cabovers. And supposedly, a number of dealers actually made those conversions. Now, maybe it was just to give a taste of what was going to come in the Edsel world, and maybe it was just to add to the hype and the advertising. So, what is it we have here? Is this one of those trucks? Nah, let's call it a tribute to the Edsel conversions that were happening in the 1950s. This particular truck was built by a gentleman named Barry Norman. He would use it to tow his own cars, and of course, to show off the Edsel truck as well. He used the illustrations that Ford put out to create his own version of the Edsel truck. Let's walk around and look at the styling of our Edsel truck. Okay, not actually an Edsel truck. This is a Ford F-Series, in this case, a Ford F-350. I'll talk about that and more in just a moment. But one of the interesting things that they did with this truck was when they did the conversion to make it look like an Edsel truck, they actually went above and beyond what the Ford dealers and the Edsel dealers were going to be doing back in those days. And that's by creating this panel that goes up front with the Edsel name. I love the fact that they did that. Now, I'm really pleased that they didn't try to go the extra distance and try to create that horse collar grille that would have been right there. I think that would have been just a touch much when they were doing that. Up front, one of the most significant things, of course, that happened in 1958 were the quad headlights. First year that you would see these on most cars. A lot of states had rules against having two headlights for a long time. Some car makers started to ease into the quad headlights in 1957, but in 1958, it became the norm. Car makers all were introducing cars that had quad headlights, especially on their trucks as well. So the result is that we end up with 4 headlights on the front of this 1958. Now, if you have a 1958 pickup, you'll think, well, wait a minute, why does this hood kind of dip down below here? This is kind of an odd line for a Ford pickup. Well, that's because you've got a light duty, maybe a half-ton. This is the 1-ton F350 version. As a result, it had a hood that dipped all the way down right here, so it had a slightly different look to it. When we talk about the fact that this is an F350, it also had a longer wheelbase. If you got the half-ton version, you'd get a 110-inch wheelbase. If you got the 250, you get a 118-inch wheelbase. This one has a 130-inch wheelbase. By the way, how many of you remember phone numbers that had a name in them? Now, for those of you who aren't that old, once upon a time, you'd have a number, the 5 digits on the back, and the exchange up front, where you would simply say, oh, I want to reach Diamond 73614. And the first 2 numbers were actual, first 2 letters were actually made it up to the first 2 numbers of the phone number. So this is kind of a fun little thing to look back on and remember what it was like back in those days. I like the fact that they put the Edsel badging right here, and this is an actual Edsel badge right there. You can see that little horse collar type emblem that they have right in the center of there. Now, I should also point out this color, once again, was specified by Ford. This was not accidental. They wanted it to look a very particular way. Got the big E, which almost looks like kind of an atomic age E, but remember, they had big plans on what was going to happen. We'll step inside in just a moment, but as you can see, this is very utilitarian, the way it's been built. Now, I don't know anything about Ben Cowan Ford, supposedly in Indio back in the day. Not sure if it's still around, but this is built up to be a tow truck, and it was a functional tow truck. Back then, what you would do is this would lower down, it would go underneath the front of the car, and you would lift it up, and that's how you would get towed away. It's interesting to think about the history of tow trucks and when this became the norm, but it was very functional in its day, and as you can see, really solid back end. I believe this had a 9-foot bed in the back, and the idea was that you could put just about anything on the back of this F350 because it was just a beast of a machine. And we actually have dualies, so you have 2 wheels in the back. It's designed to both distribute the load, which is really important, as well as to be a backup safeguard. So if you by chance had a blowout while you were towing something, you didn't have a big disaster. Big rigs have these all the time, but it also helps to distribute the weight onto the tires themselves. In terms of the rear window, we've got the small rear window as opposed to the bigger one, or the little small window that would be in the corner. It's got the classic commercial rear view mirrors right there. I love the wraparound window that came into effect in the mid-50s for Ford and for other automakers as well. But boy, this is just such a classic look for a truck, and to think that they converted it into an Edsel truck makes it even more fun. All right, before we step into the cab of our 1958 Edsel Tribute, I do want to point something out, and this just shows that this really was a real tow truck that was used over the years. If you look closely right here, you can see that the door at some point was bent. This window frame was actually bent, and when they put it back into place, it actually cracked, and you can see a big gap right here. And I think what happened is, over all those years when this was being used as a tow truck, some big guy was hopping in or hopping out. He'd grab this thing and slam it shut, or maybe he was trying to pull something, and the result was this probably started to cave in, and you can see where they pushed it back out. You can see the crease here, you can see the crease on the outside, so good work putting it back together, but it just shows that this is a real live, honest-to-goodness working truck. And to be honest with you, I think that's part of the fun thing about what we have at the museum. It's not just show vehicles, it's real, true working vehicles as well. Once you get inside, what you're getting into is the second generation of post-war trucks for Ford. You know, the first generation, they were nicer than what came before the World War II, but they began to realize that people wanted more from their trucks. They wanted a little more comfort. They wanted a little more convenience. So for 1957, they made a cab that was just a little bit bigger, a little bit more comfortable, a little better climate control. They realized the people who were buying the trucks wanted just a little bit more. Styling was pretty significant change for the dashboard as well. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if it's better. In 1956, the previous generation, they had that dashboard with the speedometer, where the speedometer kind of popped up right over the top of the dashboard. A little more stylish looking, but it didn't have very much else on the dashboard. It was pretty plain below there. For 1957, they went to the instrument cluster style, that instrument panel. Kind of remember, everything was about the jet age and aviation, so this was more in tune with what they were going after for that aviation look. Now, normally in a Ford light-duty pickup from 1958, you'd have just the speedometer and those four little gauges around it. And what's been added here, as you can see, is we've got an oil pressure, and you can tell that this underneath is supposed to have a little bit of style to it. There's supposed to be a star supposed to go right here. Instead, what you've got is the oil pressure on one side, and it looks like we've got amps on the other. Underneath, you would have an entire row of little pull knobs, everything from wipers to lights. I love this. Do you remember the choke? You know, once upon a time, we used to have to choke our engines if we wanted to get them started. Had the motor minder, which kept track of the vacuum. And of course, we had to have our CB radio. This is how the folks back at the tow company would keep track of where the tow truck was and how they were going to be going out to their next person. This particular one, I think, is a mid-1970s. It's a Regency model from the mid-1970s, but boy, that's still, 50 years ago, and that's probably when it was put into this truck. This one's missing its headliner, and I go back to, this is exactly what a utilitarian truck would have been like and how it would have been used. Great big bench seat, and the great thing is this is where the folks whose car you were towing after the engine failed or it ran into a ditch, this is where they'd be sitting as you were working your way back to the station or wherever you were towing them to get their repairs. But very utilitarian. And how about this, for this flashlight right here hooked up so that you could reach up and grab it when you'd need it, because sooner or later you were going to need it when you were hooking up that car in the back. A little nicer once again than the first generation of post-war trucks, but not nearly as nice as what they get today. But still, this is a working man's truck, a working person's truck from the mid to late 1950s, that second generation of post-war trucks. Under the hood of our Edsel tribute, we have Ford's legendary Thunderbird V8. It was Ford's high-performance engine option in the late 1950s. Now, in previous videos, I've talked about the Y-block that was introduced in 1954 as a replacement for that old flathead engine. Remember that? Now, the Y-block got its name from its shape, more like a Y with a deep-skirted crankcase that added strength and rigidity. It was an overhead valve design, so it was more efficient and more powerful than that old flathead. The original Y-block debuted with 239 cubic inches in '54, and when the Thunderbird arrived in 1955, well, they decided that car with its sporty image needed something special. So Ford created the 292 cubic inch Thunderbird V8 that made 193 horsepower. More impressive in the time, and it gave the Thunderbird the power it needed to live up to its sporty image. Ultimately, however, that engine had found its way into other Fords as the performance option, and while the Y-block was a step forward, it still had flaws. The deep skirt meant the engine was heavy, and it had problems getting oil to the top of the engine. So in 1958, Ford brought out the FE Series V8. That engine would be the foundation for serious performance for years to come. A 1958 Ford would likely have come most likely with a six-cylinder, the 139 straight six, or it could have an option of a 292 cubic inch V8 that delivered about 190 horsepower. Now, when you're looking at this engine, you're thinking, this is not exactly a show car. And to be honest with you, it's not. I mean, it's been upgraded with a Holley carburetor and some other little pieces, but for the most part, this is a vehicle that was run as a tow truck. And when it pulled up to tow you out of a ditch, this is what the engine underneath likely would have looked like. So here at the museum, we have a very true, realistic survivor of what would have been happening with a tow truck a long time ago. Ford had big plans for Edsel, big plans that evaporated very quickly when the public turned up their nose. Despite some big styling changes, Ford could not right that sinking ship. Ultimately, they sold less than 120,000 total cars during Edsel's run. Downright embarrassing when you consider all the work that went into creating the new division, including naming it after the son of Henry Ford. What an embarrassment. This truck, however, this tribute, this is a glimpse at what might have happened if Edsel could have survived, spreading their wings to offer even more options to those Edsel fanatics that never came to be.